Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. And of course, on September 20th, today, they have nerfed a number of different healers in a few different interesting ways. Today, we're going to go over the notes really quickly as to what they mean, both for individual healers and for just kind of everybody as a whole. There's a couple of small ones when they're really hardcore pressing Resto Druid to be in this, almost fallen order like the Mistweaver monks had back in Shadowlands, but now it's Grove Guardian, basically. You lose out on one of your little treant friends, but you're getting slightly more cooldown reduction out of your Incarn Tree of Life, and you can actually see your little Grove Guardian bros. So you're just really hardcore being pushed into this kind of playstyle, of course, after they had some of the nerfs to abilities like Flourish in the past. For Augmentation Evoker, I know they're not a healer, but it is going to be impacting healers by having lower amounts of overall health, lower amounts of primary stat being given out, and I guess like the lower Molten Blood absorbs that are coming into this one as well. The weird thing about this is that they're not actually just going across the board or having some limitations onto where the Ebon Might buffs are actually going to be going, particularly for dungeon healing. Now, you might remember Augmentation Evoker kind of just came in and almost made up for a lot of the damage and health changes that we've experienced twice now throughout Dragonflight, being able to just constantly have, an extra 10-15% intellect, and sometimes even just getting the crit bonus, having the absorb, the extra stamina makes a tremendous difference in terms of how it feels to heal. And these are actually pretty slight nerfs, or at least more slight than I was expecting. Aspects favor just giving the perma health increase to everybody. I was kind of expecting this to be removed, and then the rally cry effect getting mitigated even further. I was actually expecting Ebon Might to not impact healers and tanks, so I'm still surprised by this, but it doesn't really make Augmentation Evoker any less mandatory in dungeons to be pushing them up. They are reverting the Spirit Bloom buff that it had received in the last bonus for preservation. And of course, its healing increase, which, as we mentioned, was reverted. And Rewind actually getting targeted. This is something Thune mentioned, I believe, in his article about how they were trying to nerf overall cooldowns, and Rewind just kind of dodged a bullet in the first wave. Here, it actually is getting its nerf down from 40% of the damage taken. And honestly, it just kind of makes sense based off of what we've been seeing really previously with overall cooldowns getting nerfed and kind of just overall healers getting nerfed. One of the biggest things with these patch notes to keep in mind is it's not necessarily about how much you're getting nerfed, but it's how much you're getting nerfed in relation to everybody else around you, right? In a shocking turn of events, they actually buffed Jade Serpent statue Soothing Mist healing for Monk. Wow. They are making the Chi Harmony a little more effective after they nerfed it from the previous build where it was also giving you Chi Harmony off the Renewing Mist jumps. Now it's just storing some more healing. They also redesigned Healing Elixir so it's a passive instead of an active ability. So whenever you drop below 35% and are not in a lost control effect or not stunned, you instantly heal for 15% of your max health, and you generate elixirs every 30 seconds, stacking twice. The annoying thing about this is, with how bursty damage is in just WoW in general these days, that may not even save you. Abilities like Angelic Bulwark for Priest are just pretty bad because you get a small shield after you've already dropped really low, so your effective health isn't really that high at all. And Healing Elixir is kind of in the same boat. Being able to activate the elixir at 70%, 80% health to make sure you're fully topped off before a major stomp mechanic or a major raid mechanic is crazy important. And so now you take an active possible ability and remove all agency from it. And sometimes there's just no more pressure, right? You might be in a stomp, for example, or just a large AoE hit, and it's the final hit, it's the final burst that actually procs your healing elixir, right? Yeah, if you're healing through all the Forge Master Gorex slams into his anvil, and then the last tick is what actually procs your healing elixir, then you didn't really benefit that much from it because you would have all that time after the burst damage to top yourself. And so you kind of just lose a lot of flexibility and sort of strength from, how you operate your own health, which is pretty weird and disappointing. Holy Pally, once again, the Death by 1,000 Cuts continues. And I kind of talk about this. We're going to have another Holy Pally video first thing in the morning as well. So big thing, they're slowly but surely started nerfing overall healing. In PTR testing, Holy Pally was performing really well in the raid fights. But the thing is, they're just kind of like spot heal pinging anybody who drops low. And so it's not like there's some crazy massive amount of output that they're doing. So this is, I don't know, kind of weird. I do kind of get the Hand of Divinity since they are already buffing Holy Light, making it a 40% instead of an 80% buff to sort of offset some of the other healing changes that they made in the past. I really am kind of surprised that Savor the Light's Absorb Shield's getting increased. I love this ability just like thematically, and I think it's a super cool ability, and I hope that this ability gets utilized quite a bit more. I don't know why they're making changes to Merciful Aura at all. It's quite strange. This ability just bad, and it encourages bad things, basically. Touch of the Light healing, of course, is a 5%, 100% increase instead of the 700%. And I do like Word of Glory getting buffed. In the video we talk about tomorrow, I made it before, of course, these changes came in for Paladin, but I was talking about how Word of Glory needs a buff. 10% is small. I really wish it'd be more, but the other side is if they make it too strong, then it's going to like outweigh Light of Dawn. And so they still have this weird sort of position where they're trying not to like overly buff one thing or another when it comes to it. I do like that they're nerfing down Barrier of Faith so that it doesn't just become like an auto pick over Reclamation, because they also were nerfing Reclamation, which is what it competes with. That being said, it's kind of in a frustrating position because you just have so many buttons still. It's one thing if you have a competitive choice node where you're like, okay, well, I can just choose to take the passive in all forms of content and be okay. But I have to imagine the stacking barrier effect is still going to be really strong in a raid, and you're still going to be pushed into taking it and having another button to be pressing all the time. Yeah. Aura Mastery, increasing the effectiveness of Devo to 12% instead of 15%. Crazy. More overall damage reduction nerfs going to be happening into the raid. So cooldowns for Rewind are getting nerfed. Aura Mastery getting nerfed. Notably, Rallying Cry is also getting nerfed to a 10% temporary health bonus. So there's a lot of these effects that are actually getting brought down. And so again, I want to emphasize that this is sort of like healing and defensive power across the board is really heavily getting dropped. And we go on to Priest. Really interesting to note about this. Powered Life can only be activated on targets below 35% health. You're no longer going to miss with a Powered Life and hit it at a point where it's going to like go on its 30-second cooldown. The cool side of this is that you're never going to miss. The bad side is you might just be like hitting an ability to try to heal your allies and it's not activating, and then you're just sitting there hitting the button thinking something's wrong, and then you're not actually casting any spells or doing anything. So that's going to be kind of the problem. For the most part, I actually think I'm going to be running with Benevolence, the competing choice node, and not taking much Powered Life for both raids and keys, but we'll see where things go from here. As they noted for Discipline, more changes on the horizon. Hearing the feedback that Shadow Covenant and the talent tree would be more flexible and interesting if Shadow Fiend were a more viable option. So Shadow Fiend now grants a higher damage increase with Shadow Covenant grants a higher damage increase with Shadow Fiend. We've also tied in the duration with the duration of Shadow Fiend or Mindbender to make using Inescapable Torment more enjoyable. And finally, we've reduced the overall value of Shadow Covenant, particularly with Mindbender, and distributed some of the power and dependence to nudge Disc a bit closer towards consistent damage instead of heavy burst windows. And so what this really means is that when you have like a mini ramp, you can hit a strong penance, like a Mind Blast into a penance, and actually be able to produce really good output. The problem here is they kind of like Uno reverse carded Mindbender and Shadow Fiend. It used to be that, of course, Mindbender was going to be at the top of the tree here where Void Summoner is. Now they sort of reversed it, put it as a capstone at the bottom, and in a lot of cases, as we'll see as we go through these, you don't really need to take Mindbender anymore. Interesting. Ultimate Penitence. I got a chance to test this out as well. It takes into account your primary target. This is what we talked about in our previous video. We'll prioritize healing bolts of an ally selected. That also means it works with Contrition. Or damaging bolts if an enemy is selected. Man, I hope we don't play Contrition. Damage and healing is damage and healing of penance. Damage and healing of Ultimate Penitence has been increased by 25%, and an initial tick has been added at the start of the channel. When testing this, it also spreads Purge the Wicked, but only off that initial tick. So if you have one Purge the Wicked out or something like that, it's like the first bolt will hit it and then spread to Purge the Wickeds out. It doesn't just like mega replicate or anything just yet. Still interesting. Doesn't work with Shadow Covenant yet. We're making progress, slowly but surely. Embrace Shadow is the longer duration for Shadow Covenant, and that has been removed. Twilight Corruption remains in the location and increases Shadow Covenant's effectiveness. So Shadow Covenant's duration matches the duration of Mindbender at 12 seconds. Okay, so keep that in mind. And it now grants 10% shadow damage and healing increase with Bender, or 25% with Shadow Fiend, which means when you run Twilight Corruption, you have a 35% damage and healing increase out of your shadow spells when Shadow Fiend is up. Okay? That also means Penance damage and healing increased for more steady output, like we said in the notes. And then they've swapped around Mindbender and Void Summoner locations, like we mentioned. Void Summoner gives you so much cooldown reduction for your Shadow Fiend, okay? It's to the point where you could so comfortably have Shadow Fiend up with every single evangelism ramp with ease, no matter what, and not have to worry about it whatsoever. This, I think, is incredibly convenient because what you're able to do is not be as statuesque with needing to spam lots of smites. Because it was that you'd have your 35% Shadow Covenant value out of Mindbender, and you just be like in this position where you're near forced to be spamming smite all the time to get more and more and more. You could still do that, but then it would be having a weaker Shadow Covenant more frequently, and you'd still be playing around it to try to get it for your mini ramps all the time. As opposed to playing a Shadow Covenant, a stronger Shadow Covenant style, where you're always having it with your evangelisms, which will always be more bursty because it's a 35% buff instead of the, I believe it's the 20% buff, since it's a 10% increase here with Mindbender, and then another 10% with Twilight Corruption, right? So as a result, you'd have a larger amount of burst by playing Shadow Fiend. You'd have an easier time getting the cooldown reduction around it. And so that's why I said at the start, it's kind of like an Uno reverse card. It doesn't really feel that good taking Mindbender. There's a number of different like potential downsides. Yes, it's true you're going to have like your double tap smite, which could be very effective and very impactful. But if you're able to have enough shadow spells, particularly in like Execute, it's going to be very, very powerful to be able to have that 35% damage buff rather than having the 20%, but having more like double tap smites. It's worth trying, it's worth figuring out, but I actually would be really fine living in a world where you're playing primarily off of your Shadow Fiend, because it takes a lot of pressure off of needing to be still as a statue and mashing the smite button 24/7, and you have a lot more flexibility and a lot lower of a downside if you're then able to be not worrying about spamming smite all the time to feed Mindbender, to feed Shadow Covenant. And instead, you're more free to multi-dot. You're more free if you need to move for mechanics. And hopefully that Penance buff for more consistent damage is also going to be helpful in that vein as well. Expiation got a buff from 10% and 20% increased damage for Blast and Shadow of Death to 15 and 30. Oh, but this talent is still not great. At least not great unless you're in Execute phase quite a lot. Which means, I don't know, maybe Dungeon Environment, it could still be worth utilizing. You also have to keep in mind your Aberrus tier set is like a 20 or 25% Purge the Wicked damage increase, and you're losing that going into Guardians of the Dream. So naturally, the damage that Expiation is doing itself is also going to be decreased, not only by Mind Blast being less prevalent in your rotation, your profile, but also by having less Purge the Wicked damage in general. So keep that in mind. Wheel and Woe, increasing Smite's damage by 20% per stack instead of 12, which is quite a lot, and Powered Shield by 10% instead of the 5%. Now this is a pretty good buff, but one of the big synergies in the spec that's a lot of fun is also playing Harsh Discipline and Wheel and Woe together, so you're almost always min-maxing your bolts. Harsh Discipline still feels really bad to utilize, and I think even though you're not as dependent on being statuesque with a Shadow Fiend focused build, you still are going to be sitting there mashing lots of smites, and I don't think it's a bad thing to have old Harsh Discipline back, especially when it seems like Twilight Equilibrium and Expiation aren't having as much of a home in a raid, which are frequently like GCD intensive, more work intensive than some other spells, or other talent options. So I'd kind of be fine if they revert Harsh Discipline quite a bit. Overall, this feels kind of like a lateral change, I think is what Calp said when I was talking in stream. And I'd really agree. I think it makes the gameplay feel a little bit better, but I wouldn't really be like, this is some crazy mega buff. In fact, I think it makes the profile feel a little bit better on paper. The 2 set with the Atonement extension still feels really terrible. And the 4 set double tap with Smite is like interesting as a concept, but it's something that in the back of my head I'm not really a huge fan of, especially after losing our Aberrus tier set. I do think Twilight Equilibrium is in a prime position to be replaced with some kind of potential option for those instant cast Radiances that you can choose in certain situations when you'd like to have it. Right now, I think the biggest problem that Disc is facing is that its capstones with Mindbender, Twilight Equilibrium, Wheel and Woe, mainly because of its synergy with Harsh Discipline, and Aegis of Wrath, all kind of feel like a graveyard. You could toss an Expiation into there as well. There's a number of talents that just don't really feel that good to take because they're from the old world where casting Mind Blast a lot was very helpful, or just activating the old Harsh Discipline was helpful to feed Wheel and Woe. Aegis, they just need to fix Aegis. Right? But there's a number of those sort of traits from like the old world, and now they exist. Rapture still feels like a pretty mediocre talent and ability, and the support talents as well also feel bad too. So I think that should be prime area for them to be working on going forward. Holy Priest, of course, with the flash and heal buffs, Trail was overperforming. So we're reducing its value to match its previous power level. We're also increasing the value of Pontifex since it was unpopular, and we're making Echo of Light's periodic healing faster so it's more responsive to damage. This final bit is actually really nice. Big fan. But I thought the entire point was to be able to encourage some other playstyles with Holy Priest and also follow their higher level objective of being able to just make spot healing better. And so that is where it's kind of confusing to me, because playing Lightweaver in Raid in our previous testing last weekend, it was just kind of mediocre. It was like, wasn't that great. And then, of course, nerfing Trail on top of that is just not going to add much to the equation as well. Palm also got 5% healing nerf, which kind of makes sense from its profile. You don't really want to have this like passive ability being the largest heal that you have in your book. It does feel quite strange, but you're also getting a lot of your Palm healing reduced by losing the Aberrus tier set. Once again, they also nerfed down Prismatic Echoes, where it is increasing the healing by 4 and 8% instead of the 6 and 12, decreasing the overall healing, but again, making it tick faster as well. Divine Image for Dazzling and Blessed Light healing has been decreased. And once again, this sort of feels like it's in the same vein of like, let's encourage a potential Lightweaver playstyle. But then they, you know, nerf one of the other ways that Lightweaver is benefiting in your healing, and instead increase Pontifex, which is an unpopular talent for honestly a reason. Having your flash and heal crits activating stronger holy words feels kind of counterintuitive, because you'd be casting these flashes and heals and then wanting to spend it on Sanctify, because Sanctify is so heavily more powerful really than Serenity. Kind of strange. And of course, as I mentioned, they are buffing up they are changing around how Echo of Light is healing, which hopefully would make it heal and reduce a lot of its overheal, and hopefully make Mastery just a better option as well for Holy Priest going forward. Because it's been kind of weird, this expansion with Prismatic Echoes overall. So unfortunately, getting like more nerfs, and this is kind of representative of like healers as a whole are sort of just getting nerfs across the board. I actually thought they were going to go with another like health and damage change like they had in the past, but it seems like instead they're just kind of going directly for the jugular for multiple different healers sort of across the board. And so while people are kind of panicking about their individual spec, I always want people to like take a wider angle lens and look that this is kind of happening to everyone, and it's more about which healer is sort of losing the least. All right, that's it. Resto Shaman. Whew. Riptide, Healing Surge, and Wave doing a lot more healing. Ancestor's Awakening power was increased beyond the intended levels. So again, I kind of view this in the same vein of like Trail of Light changes, where they're like, ah, well, your direct healing is doing a lot more now, and now we're going to nerf what was benefiting from your direct healing that you have. They are, of course, changing these set bonuses, where the Tidal Reservoir now heals for 15% of all Riptide healing instead of 20, and lasts for 15 seconds instead of 10. If I remember correctly, the Shamans were talking about how much their tier set was actually accounting for their overall output. Of course, their force set has been adjusted. It's a chance to create a new Riptide has been reduced to 5% instead of the 10%. So, again, when you are perhaps panicking or worried about your healer, it's kind of just happening across the board. And once again, this is sort of indicative of larger changes to healing in general, rather than thinking about it as only a change to healers and they're hating our guts and all that other stuff. They're changing a lot of the damage mechanics that are happening in the Amir Drasil raid. There's a lot of heal absorbs, there's a lot of rot damage, there's actually quite a bit of prio target healing with like little NPCs that you need to activate at specific moments, which is going to require spot heal from your healers to be stronger. And I don't know if these are going to be good or not, but this is sort of the vein that they're thinking of for why they're trying to, I guess, be nerfing a lot of the different healers across the board so that they are less powerful. There's also the ballooned, really tier set, or sorry, the ballooned output. Let me see if I can find it for you guys really quick. That we're all going to be getting, here it is, from gear, huzzah! Whereas in the season 2 end, we're around this 450 mark, or 447, I should say, right? We are going to be getting the equivalent of like LFR raid gear. That's basically LFR raid gear that we're going into season 3 with. So we're getting so much more power and stats from, and stamina as well, from the incoming gear upgrades. And I almost wonder, since I know some people are hitting diminishing return points, which is like 5,500 stat rating or so, I wonder if it also means that we are going to be getting a lot more stamina than like healing power as a whole, which is going to mean that healing in general could hopefully, in an ideal world, in a perfect world, not be so insanely bursty and not be so insanely like yo-yo-y, where you might be a gamer dad and you want to crack open a beer when you get home from work and heal a dungeon, and it's the most stressful shit possible. Hopefully, if the relative strength of healers is lower and stamina is higher, the damage is going to be a bit more steady, so that when they want to make sure healers are challenged, they don't instantly opt for this crazy burst yo-yo type effect. That is the hope. And if you guys would like to see another video kind of going over that in a little bit more depth, I know that's kind of a simplistic explanation of it, I'd be happy to do so. Let me know in the description down below. And of course, if you have not subbed already, be sure to do so as well. I will say, overall thoughts on these nerfs and these changes, let's see what the raid is actually going to be able to bring to us this weekend. Although, I do really want to emphasize that from just a fun perspective, and in my opinion, I feel like this is going to be the last like new raid of the X-Pack, it can be very noticeably disappointing not having any sort of new power bonus to come into, having kind of weak healing trinkets, and having mostly noticeable downgrades in our tier set bonuses without cool options to be able to replace it and get us excited for the future. So while Blizzard might view this from like the health of the healer's perspective, they should also be looking at it from, is this going to be fun, exciting, interesting to get people hyped up about the new patch, and why should they get hyped up about the new patch, especially for all the complaints that we healers have had. Let me know what you guys think as well, if you think similarly or if you think differently. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Thank you for tuning into the update, and I'll catch y'all next time.